Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Building Bridges with Greg and Jill. I am one of your hosts, Greg Johnson. My wife, Jill Johnson, will speak to you in just a minute. So glad to have you back for our July edition of Building Bridges with Greg and Jill, the podcast that seeks to invite people into conversations about important things that we may disagree about, but to do that in a way that is both conversational and profitable in terms of dialogue. We can come at different questions with different perspectives, and we can honor and respect one another and maintain our differences, by the way, without being unkind or unloving. So that's what we're trying to do, and we illustrate that month after month on the first Tuesday of each month as we drop our podcast to all of you who tune in and watch and listen on our different platforms. We illustrate that by bringing in guests from various perspectives on religion, on culture, in leadership realms and things like that. And we just kind of have these conversations. We had an outstanding conversation, if you missed it last month, with President Walter Kim of the National Association of Evangelicals, who was in town. Some very insightful things that he shared about what does it mean to be an evangelical in today's world, and is that term even a word we should be using anymore, because it's kind of tainted in a lot of people's mind. Well, he answered that question in a pretty profound way, so check that one out if you missed it. And as always, please subscribe and hit the notification bell and write something in the comment lines, because the more you do that, the more YouTube thinks people are watching, and that's helpful. But you've heard that from every podcast that you listen to, so you don't need me to repeat it anymore. But we'll just kind of say thank you for doing that if you're able. Love to have you share and subscribe. So anyways, our topic today, Jill, as we enter into the 7th month of the year, July, halfway through 2023, and it just started like 2 weeks ago. So here we are, almost halfway. Well, we are days away from being halfway through, and then we're heading to Christmas, so it's amazing. So anyways, welcome, Jill. We're going to be talking about what today? What are we talking about, and who are we talking to?
Well, a lot of our shows have been really focused on talking to people that have a different faith than us. And so we're going to go a little bit different route and just talk about people that are in situations that are different than us. And we're going to introduce you to Mike Heil, who has written a book called Pursued. And he's got an amazing story. And if you'll look on Amazon at this book, there are review after review after review, what an impact it's made on people, specifically that have been through addictions. And I assume we'll get into, if you haven't struggled with addiction, it probably is really a great book to help you to reach people that are struggling with that. So I'm looking forward to getting to know Mike a little bit more and his story, and to introduce him to you.
Yeah. Mike, if an individual is listening or watching our podcast, it's not as though maybe every one of them has had the same kind of addiction, but I'm going to guess most of us have some addictive qualities to us and some areas of our life that do reveal as addictions. And even if they really don't think that they do, they know somebody that does. So that's where your book can be very helpful as well, like Joe is saying, to help someone who does struggle. But tell us, welcome to the show, and tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you both for having me. So the book it's actually about how drugs, sex, and success, money, status, wealth, hooking up, acknowledgement from others, don't satisfy in the way that they promise or in the way that God can. And so it's really a journey of anyone who's tried to find meaning in the things of this world, and they just found that the more they had, the more they needed, that once they got that car or that dream job or that house, they were only satisfied for a moment, and then they found themselves needing more. And so they set the next goal, and then they strive with all their might and all their heart after that, and they get it, and then they're okay for a little bit, and at the end of the day, they still have to face themselves, and at some point they realize they look a little bit like a hamster on a wheel, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so that's a journey I think anyone can relate to.
Yep.
But it's told with tears and with laughter and with stories that anyone can relate to, just stories of trying to fit in. And especially, this 21st century world we live in, there are mean, 2 out of 3 high school seniors have tried alcohol. Kids are experimenting with drugs. It's very, very common. Drug abuse since the pandemic has gone up 61% in middle schools. So we're talking middle schools.
Yeah.
Junior high, high school, everyone is hearing and exposed to this. And so in our generation, it might not be as common. It might not have been as prevalent, but
that's kind of cool that you're putting us in your generation.
Oh, thank you.
We might be one generation ahead of you.
Okay, in my generation and those ahead of me,
But in all fairness,
common.
Every generation, I mean, you talk about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, 90s, every generation has addictions to the things that this world offers by way of drugs and alcohol and partying. And that's really nothing new. As Solomon, the great king of Israel, said, there's nothing new under the sun. So, it maybe sometimes is expressed in a different kind of drug. Mm-hmm. You know, we've recently heard from Greg Laurie that the same kinds of drugs that are most prominent right now in the culture today are the same kinds of drugs that were largely being used for some of the first time in the late 60s and early 70s. So the same kind of quest to, what was the old phrase? Turn on, turn off. Oh, man. I wasn't a part of that generation, the 60s.
Somebody will put it in the comment
tune
line
off.
for us. I don't know what you're talking
Turn
about.
on and turn off, or do something like, about drugs, And help us out with that if you have a comment. You're like, Greg, you're so lame. Anyways, but yeah, so, the very kinds of things that are being done today, cocaine, marijuana, and some other various drugs, are the kind of drugs of choice of the late 60s. So it seems like this generation is as empty as that generation was. And we're hoping that would mean that maybe some of the generation that we're engaging right now will find that these drugs are empty.
Well,
and there
I
is
love
hope in
too
Jesus.
that you broadened it to something that we can all relate to. Is there are times that we make decisions to put things at a high level in our life, and for those of us that are followers of Christ, anything that's put above Christ and our relationship with Him can become an addiction. Yeah. And that's when we're not relying upon Him. And so I'd love to hear more about your story and how you came to write this book.
Yeah.
Because you're not simply a guest on our program, you're a dear personal friend. We have done New Year's Eve together with you and your wife. So we've known each other. You've served as a pastor. You're not currently in that capacity. Now you're an author and big-time guy, world traveler, all that kind of stuff. But anyways, tell us your story, because you have been raised here in Utah and you know this culture pretty well.
Yeah. Just really quick before we get to my story, I want to just add to what you were saying. It's the types of drugs that are changing, and 80% of the world's opioid supply is consumed in the U.S.
Wow.
So, and then 4 out of 5 of people who get hooked on heroin start with prescription drugs. And so it's starting with prescriptions, and it's just people are getting hooked and they just can't stop.
Yeah. No, that's relevant to the epidemic and the deaths with fentanyl and all the other stuff that's going on. So it makes a lot of sense that we talk about that, and that your experience can help educate and inform and inspire others.
Yeah. And there's been a 200% increase actually in opioid consumption since the 21st century. So in the first 10 years of the 21st century. So year after year, since 1991, there's been an increase in overdose deaths and an increase in consumption. So for every year since 1991, save one. Wow. So it does keep going up and up and up. And then I think the saddest statistic is that 91% of those who overdose continue to refill their prescriptions. And there's actually, in 2016, I believe, there were over 250 million bottles of opiates prescribed, which is enough to give every American in our country his or her own bottle of opiates. So it's just, in Utah, of course, Happy Valley, it's known for its hard drugs. Underneath all of our smiles, there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of ache that we're not addressing. And that's really what I'm trying to pull up. Like, I'm using these statistics to show, hey, this is more prevalent than we could ever imagine, but God is more relevant than we could ever imagine too. And a lot of people are like me, where they're throwing God out, and he's the answer they've been looking for. He's everything they need. They just don't know it because they won't listen, because all they've seen is religion, which is do's and don'ts. It's morality. It's empty. There's not a lot of hope in religion. There's a lot of shame and a lot of condemnation and a lot of hopelessness. But when you meet Jesus face to face, like I did, and you see the heart of the gospel, and you see, the King of the universe, the creator of everything, loves me, a drug addict, a loser, a failure in every way. He loves me enough, the one who created the stars, who's 1 trillion times bigger than our universe, and I'm like 1 trillion times smaller than a germ. And he loves me enough to take on flesh and die for me, die for all my sins and all my brokenness. And
it
changes everything.
And pursue you. That's pretty amazing.
Pursue me, even though I'm shaking him, even though I'm throwing him off for all these stupid, empty, fleeting, hopeless things. And yet God is there at every outset. He's pursuing me. He's not giving up on me. And so my personal story, just weaving that in there, I just
want to just give you a minute to pause, because I want to make sure that the mantra of the 1960s is clearly articulated. It was tune in, turn off, tune out. The book by Timothy O'Leary that defined the 60s. Tune in, tune out, tune off. No, wait, I said it wrong. Tune in, turn on, and drop out. Oh, brother. I am lame. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, this is great. Oh, man.
So your story.
Yeah. So I just tried weed. Everyone was talking about it, and my friends were doing it.
How old were you at the time?
About 14.
Okay.
Yeah. And from that
Growing
point
up
on,
in what area?
I grew up in Pleasant Grove, Utah County, my whole life, always trying to fit in, like going to Boy Scouts and Young Men's, and always feeling like a just an outcast. I just couldn't fit in. And when I met the Stoners, they accepted me. And that meant a lot. And I just thought it was this harmless thing. I just thought, oh, it makes you feel good. Yeah. And the people who are doing it are having fun, or at least they appear to be. And what I've learned is that we don't know how much it's going to cost. So all we know is it feels good right now. Right. And that's why people are talking about it. That's why, all the other kids are like, man, this is so fun. This feels so good. Because all they see is how it makes me feel right now. It releases the neurotransmitter dopamine in my brain and makes me feel good. That's all they can see, but they have no idea it could cause them decades of pain and suffering and like damage to their soul and an inability to live without these things. And that was really my story, is the more I had it, the more I needed it. So it started out as a want, but at some point I became completely incapable of enjoying life without drugs, without weed.
Yeah. Wow. I think that concept of not realizing the long-term cost for a short-term pleasure is a theme in God's Word, the Bible, where, even the faithful people of God were referred to as those who looked past the current passing pleasures of life for a greater goal, for a more profound experience with God. And I know that we're going to get to that part of the story, but it's not lost to me that knowing the person that you are and where you've come from and how you got there and then how you changed, it really is a remarkable story of somebody who has been given the chance to change the very course direction of their life and embrace a worldview that brings life and not death, and hope and not fear, and joy and not pain. And I know this was a labor of love even to write this book, because it's no simple thing to write a book. I mean, it takes hours and hours and hours of effort that you don't even know if it's going to pay off at all, but you're investing in something that you think can really help somebody. So as you kind of were dabbling with marijuana and getting to know the stoners there in Pleasant Grove, Utah County, what kind of happened next?
I just kept getting arrested. So, I mean, when you're a pothead in Pleasant Grove, there's not a lot of crime in Pleasant Grove. Mm-hmm. And so after my first time getting arrested, it was like my truck. I was convinced that the police had like a picture of me in their waiting room. Yeah. And it was like Pleasant Grove's most wanted. Because I couldn't shake them. Like people, my car, every time I got in it, I would get pulled over. It was just like, I couldn't.
Well, were you committing crimes every time you got in your car?
Yeah, so the odds were in their favor. So
what kind of crime were you doing?
But I felt like they were getting paid to ruin my life.
Yeah.
I felt like that, and it was so frustrating. Here I am, this kid. I'm just trying to enjoy life. And everywhere I go, I'm arrested. I have all these fines. I've got hours and hours of community service counseling. My license gets suspended. I have to walk and longboard everywhere in the snow, for years. And it just so many consequences.
Why do you think they had your number like that? Were you special? What do they have a tracking device on your car? I mean, what
were your friends experiencing the same things?
We all had our fair share of arrests, but
yours was more.
I had a 5-month period where I got arrested 5 times in 5 months with a dozen allegations, and ended with a V squad of cop cars chasing me down Center Street.
Oh my goodness.
And they caught me, they threw me in the holding cell, and I was convinced my life was over. I just thought I've ruined everything. And I just remember when they pulled me out of that cell and they're telling my parents, your kid is screwed up. He's gonna be locked up for a long time. His future's gone. And they're just explaining all that I had done. And I just felt so hopeless and empty. And my parents just showed me love. They're the most loving Christian people you can imagine, and so it's not their fault. Like they have nothing to do with me becoming an addict. All they did was show me love. But I remember going home from that arrest, and I remember just feeling like I deserved to be punished, and all they showed me was love.
Wow.
And I felt like I needed to punish myself, and so I went and I grabbed this pair of scissors and I just started cutting. And at some point, I just felt like I needed more punishment, and so I grabbed a razor blade and I put the same amount of pressure, and it just split open, and there's blood all over the floor, just a puddle of blood, and I grabbed a roll of toilet paper and just bled through, and I wasn't suicidal. I didn't know that was going to happen, but I just was so hopeless, and that. I guess that experience, the irony was that the people around me were looking at me and they were saying, I wish I had what you had. Mm-hmm. You have all the girls, you have all the parties, you have all the hookups and connections, and people were envious. I had everything that the drug life had to offer, and yet it was completely empty.
Wow. And when you were in that situation, did you have a comment you want to make?
No, I did want to focus on just one thing that I feel like we kind of jumped over a little bit, but that is that you, at the very beginning, you said they accepted me, talking about the people that were doing drugs, and that was something that really drew you in. And I think as the body of Christ right now, we are learning that we have been judgmental over the years, and that people don't necessarily feel safe among people that are following Christ, and that's not a reflection of who Christ is. And if we're following Christ, that we should be the people that are loving and accepting and not judging people, that people will be attracted to us and want to be a part of what we are doing because we're helping to lead them to Christ. And so it's both sad to hear that, you know, that was the one place that you felt accepted, but it's also encouraging to say, man, we need to get this better. And if we're going to be examples of Christ, we should act like Christ.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. And I really think if we acted more like Jesus, right? Because I couldn't see Jesus growing up here. I just saw religion and it looked so empty. And I think if we could represent Jesus' heart more, Jesus said it's not the healthy or the well who need a doctor, it's the sick. And he exemplified that with his life. He spent time with the prostitutes and he spent time with the tax collectors and all the people who were broken and doing the wrong things. He spent time with them and he spoke into their lives. And the woman at the well who's committing adultery, and she's just so lost. And he just spoke into that hurt. He didn't speak politics. He didn't speak religion or doctrine. He spoke into her heart. And he said, I'm the answer.
Absolutely.
I'm what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Sorry to interrupt there a little bit.
I follow it up, because even as parents are dealing with their own Michaels, in their life, their sons, their daughters, wanting to love and be there for their kids, just to give some context to maybe your own parental system and how they loved you during that time. It's not as though you felt indulged or allowed or encouraged to participate in these things by your parents, did they? I mean, did they set a standard? Did they kind of help you see that there are consequences to the choice that you're making? So for our listeners, what's the balance between love and kind of structure and assistance and coming alongside of not judgmentalism, but, hey, this is not working well for you, and this cannot continue, and if you do, it's going to kill you. So how does a person bring truth into that scenario while loving you and not judging you and not condemning you? But, even Jesus said, go and sin no more. So speak to that a little bit from a parental perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That is, yeah. People often, in the name of love, will enable other people. And I think that was, if my parents had any error, it was that. It was that they loved me so much, they couldn't kick me out. They couldn't put me on the streets, even though that's what a lot of parents would have done. And that's what my friends' parents were doing. And there's this, at some point, love has to come with truth. Love has to come with rules and has to come with boundaries. And at some point, we have to stop enabling. If the person that we love is lying to us and manipulating us and they're using us, stealing from us, we have to set our foot down, and when we say that we're going to give a consequence, we have to do it. We have to, and we also have to let them face the consequences of their own actions, because if we keep stepping in and taking those consequences for them, they'll never learn. They'll just keep doing it and thinking they don't even have to pay for it. Yeah. So my parents made me pay for my own fines, which was good. They did have several hard conversations with me where it's, hey, you're killing yourself. You're throwing away your life. And then they tried to ground me, but I would just climb out of the window at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Yeah. And it's really hard to know what to do at that point. Yeah. But if they would have kicked me out, I wouldn't have held it against them. I would have known that I deserved it. And there's a lot of time when you can make a plan with someone. Look, hey, we're going to get a job. We're going to follow through. And if you don't do this, there's going to be these consequences. And it's very important that we stick with those.
Yeah. And it's there's nothing easy about that. To try to hold a loved one, a child in particular, accountable for their actions, to help them get to a place where they can make better choices before they get so addicted that they can't control their choices anymore, and the law gets involved and the consequences of jail time and long-term problems there. how to balance and yet at the same time maintain that love and that truth investment, knowing that there's no perfect path. You can't read a book and say, do this when this happens at this time. So it's a lot of prayer on the part of parents. It's a lot of prayer on the part of friends. You kind of conveyed this earlier at your start point, but Ravi Zacharias has said a comment long ago that I've always committed to memory. The loneliest moment in life is when you've just experienced that which you thought would bring you the ultimate, and it somehow lets you down. So if you're pursuing some ultimate goal, boy, that car, that girl, that guy, that house, that job, that notoriety, that fame, that publicity, that achievement, and you get it, you go, okay, I'm the star. I'm the big shot. I got all the stuff. I got the stuff I wanted. Why am I not happy? Why am I not content? Why is this not lasting? Yeah. And then you turn to things to maybe help you get through that disappointment.
Yeah.
So how did your road from basic marijuana and law offenses and trouble as a teenager move into something far more serious?
Mm-hmm. I would say even without my consent, it just grew that way. And a lot of people don't get that. They think, oh, I'm just young, I'm just having fun, but they don't realize how addicting these things are. They think they're immune to addiction, and that's what I thought. I thought I've got a lot of self-resolve. I'm not an addict, and even when I was an addict, I kept telling myself I'm not an addict, and I'm not going to get addicted. That these things don't have control over my life, and I remember waking up each day and just needing to get high, just needing something to numb my heart, something to make me feel good, to give me physical pleasure. And I didn't realize that hedonism couldn't fill the hole in my heart, right? That making yourself feel good doesn't make your life good.
Which is what hedonism is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just seeking pleasure. So seeking pleasure, it doesn't satisfy, but that's what the world tells us to do. And then the world also tells us, like, seek money and success and prosperity. So consumerism and materialism, and that doesn't satisfy either. And at the end of the day, you're faced with yourself. It's none of these things are hitting home, and yet I'm still so in need. I still need something, and at some point you're building habits, and at some point it's just what you do.
You know, one of the things you talked about in your book that you're kind of brushing on a little bit here is that you didn't feel like you were enough. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. I think that, there are a lot of different religions in the world that require us to kind of be enough in and of ourselves. Yeah. And the message of the gospel is very different than that. How did you expand on that, what you meant by that, and maybe go into an understanding of the gospel and how that's different from what you were pursuing?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So when I looked at the world around me and I saw this religion, I immediately thought, okay, life is short, you only get to live it once. Now the question is, how do we do that to its fullest? How do we really enjoy life while we can? Because when we die, we lose it all. It's all gone. And that's really what the school system teaches us. And it teaches us we're sophisticated animals, and our lives have no purpose. It's all meaningless. We're just here. We came from a bomb. Life's a cosmic blip. It's a cosmic mishap. There's no meaning to our origin. It's an accident. And when we die, we turn to dirt and lose everything we ever worked for. And that's what we're taught in school. And then at the same time you go to church and they say, no, it's meaningful. You're here for a reason. And there's these two ideas that are so different. And all the smart people believe, the science approach, we're all just animals. There's no meaning to any of it. and then they criticize, the religious people who aren't as intelligent, and you're kind of, at least for me, I was left thinking, like, if there is no God, then all there is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And since I couldn't ever see God, all I saw was religion, then it was its own rat race. It was it was just as bad as the pleasure rat race and the materialism rat race. There's the religion rat race, which is just trying to make yourself feel good. But for me, when I looked at it, it was like, they're the most miserable of all, and they don't even have any pleasures. Like, at least here you can get high, you can get drunk. At least here you feel good. Here you got money, right? But in the religion one, it's like, this is the most empty of all. And
that's a good point.
I really, I had an accident, and God saved my life when he should have let me die. And he used all these miracles to save me. And it really, for the first time in my life, I saw that God wasn't just a pile of bricks, and he wasn't a set of outdated rules. And he wasn't the people who claim to represent him. He was his own being, and he represents himself, and he's God Almighty, the creator of the universe, and he made me, and he loves me. And so for a long time, I had this worldview, it's all meaningless, and all we have is pleasure, and then we die, and it's everything we ever worked for is gone. But when God broke into that worldview, it wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about me trying to earn God's favor through religion and doing enough good deeds, which we could never do enough to outweigh our sin. And for me, that was very evident. But that's the Bible, that's the gospel too. None of us can do enough good deeds to outweigh our faults ever. If we had eternity to do it, we could never do enough good. And so my whole life had been trying to be good enough, but also feeling like it's all meaningless. And when God broke into that, I realized it's never been about me and what I can do. It's always been about him and his love for his creation. The creator who made us, he sustains me. Every breath I have is his gift to me. Colossians 1:15-7, it says, "For through Christ all things were made, and in him all things are held together." So Jesus made the universe. He holds the universe together. He's the eternal creator. So I have 1 billion cells per square inch, and he's holding them together. All of them, so that my body can heal when it gets cut. So when my heart's breaking and I cut my wrist, he lets it heal. He heals my body, but he also heals my heart. And my creator, even when I'm giving him the middle finger and running the opposite direction towards all these empty things that don't satisfy, he holds me together. He holds me. Every breath is his gift to me.
Yeah.
And he pursues me, and he pursues me, and he pursues me until I finally realize all of this stuff is a lie. And it's empty, and it will never satisfy. And he's the only one who can.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just yesterday I was at an eye appointment, and I was talking to a young gal who was taking some kind of photograph of my eye, and she told me that she had some eye operations as a little girl, and that kind of interested her in her career choice, and eventually that's why she works in the optometry world. And as we were chatting, she told me all about that, and then she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a guy who likes to talk about who made those eyeballs." Because I believe there's a God who is the great designer, and he is the creator of all these amazing things that our bodies have. And so I'm a pastor, and I talk about God a lot to people. And she's like, "Oh, that's so cool." And she said, "I'm not very religious, but I'm very spiritual." And it was like, so kind of standard, feeling and heart that we get from our late teens and early 20s, something that, I'm just done with church, I'm done with religion, I'm done with institutions, and I want to just be with my community and the people who accept me, people who love me for who I am, and if those are the stoners or whatever the term is today for that crowd, or the druggies or whatever, I don't mean that in an inflammatory way, just we all get names, the jocks and the cheerleaders and the whatever, in high school and then on and into life. But in reality, what you have just said is so fundamental to life. It's a message that I think Jesus has talked about and his followers have talked about for 2,000 years, that the world promises this, and it gives you nothing.
Yeah.
And this, which does not seem to be a life of pure hedonism and happiness and joy, but it actually involves sacrifice. It actually involves obedience. It actually involves serving others and loving people when it's not easy to love them. How can that be appealing? How can that be better than this? And you've just articulated that so well. I know you spoke about your accident momentarily, but in the midst of your rebellion as a teenager and embracing drugs and getting this crowd of people to be your community, this accident was a major snowboarding accident, correct? That almost took your life, and it was almost a miracle that you were saved, that you physically did not die. And how old were you at that time?
18.
So at 18, you have a near-death experience that begins to, basically reorientate your thinking process. Is that kind of a major turning point for you when you go through that?
Huge. Yeah.
And walk us through that, because when you finally woke up after being hauled off the mountain and realized how bad a shape you were in, then what?
Yeah. So I actually realized I was 19.
Okay.
Just doing the math quickly in my head. But I had, the year leading up to that event, I had been going to a lot of Christian events on campus at the University of Utah. So I'd been trying with everything I had in me to pull away from the drug life and retrain all those bad habits into good ones. So I was replacing drug use with exercise, and I was replacing all the negative things with positive things, with studying and with so I call it destructive cycles.
Okay.
Where you can't stop doing things and they're just pulling you down. I replaced them with constructive cycles. But they're both cycles. They both keep you round and round.
Right. Good.
But I had met born again Christians, and it was the first time in my life meeting born again Christians my age, and they blew my mind. They're praying in tongues, and they're saying, "Hey, bring us all your drug addict friends, and we'll pray for them, and God can set them free, and bring us any sick people you find, and God can heal them." And it was just like going from this black hole of selfishness, like I just need to fill this gap with pleasure, going from that to how can we love someone else who's hurting, and how can we make a difference in their lives? And it wasn't because we were good now. It was because we had Jesus, and because he had us in his hands, and because he wanted to help others and love others. And so it was like this whole world shift where I'm introduced to Christianity, and my heart was just, I saw these Christians and I thought, they have it. They have what I'm looking for, what I've been looking for all this time, and I wanted it. And so I was going to as many church services as I could, and InterVarsity and Campus Crusade and all these things.
Kind of that addictive personality took over again in a different direction.
Yes, and I'll take being addicted for Jesus. I'll take that.
Right. But wasn't it through the prescriptions that you got for your pain and for your recovery from the ski accident, the snowboarding accident, that is where you were introduced to all of these
opioids.
Opioids. There you go.
I had been a heroin addict for a long time by that point.
So that's in the same family of drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. But of course, when I got prescribed those, it was very difficult for me. That even though I was a Christian now, I abused those because that's what I knew how to do. And when your doctor hands you, hey, here's OxyContin, and here's a bunch of syringes, and here's the strongest drug, that back then that we manufacture and hand out, like, here it is, and you're handing it to someone who was just barely a recovered addict, you're setting them up for failure.
Oh my goodness.
So that was a really hard time, but I by God's grace, he's the hero of my story. I'm not. I'm not. I became a Christian and now I'm perfect. That's fake. That's not encouraging for anyone. I gave my life to the King of the universe, and he loves me, and he's got me in his hands, good or bad days or good days. Sometimes you mess up, and your hope's not in your performance. It's in your King who died for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
Wow. I assume, a lot of times when there are things that we go through, God ends up opening doors to people who have gone through similar things. Mm-hmm. Do you find that in your life where you have an opportunity to impact people that have struggled with some of the same things?
Yeah. Yes. So I do a lot of evangelism, and sometimes that's with homeless people, or sometimes that's at a juvenile detention center, or sometimes it's just on the street or at the grocery store. But I actually, this Easter, a couple months ago, I got to share at Slate Canyon, which is the detention center I was locked up at as a kid. So I got to go there on Easter and share with them and give them each a copy of my book.
Wow.
And it was amazing. Like, all the kids in that room, like, it was, you could tangibly feel God there. And they were just, it hit home, because they were like, I've tried everything too, and all it did was lie to me, and now my life is in shambles, and I need Jesus. I need help. I can't do it on my own.
Wow.
And to have God presented to them, the way he presents himself, as the prodigal father that somehow doesn't grow tired with us. Like, the God who, even though he knew after he saved my life from that accident that I would stab him in the back, he still chose to save me. That God, like, so loving, I can't fathom it. I'll spend the rest of my life, eternity, fathoming his love, which has no height or depth or width or lengths. It's just, it's so beautiful and so limitless and so full of forgiveness and so unmerited and unmeritable.
Yeah. Just to refer to a letter that a guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to a group of people in Ephesus. He says in chapter 2 that all of you were dead, not dying, not almost dead, not kind of dead, not mostly dead, but you were dead in your sins and trespasses against God.
Yeah.
And this is how you lived your life, and this is how we all lived our lives. Yeah. And then this beautiful little two-word construction, but God. But God, being rich in his grace and mercy, loved you with a unbearable love. So I want you to look at the camera, and if you're jogging right now or listening on Apple iTunes or something, and you've got a kid who is just plummeting. You suspect drugs, you fear drugs, you believe there's drugs, you don't like the crowd your son or daughter are hanging out with, you can't get them away, they've been arrested, they're just making one bad choice after another. And, offer them something that maybe could help them reach their son or daughter, because what I'm getting at is, praise God for your story, Mike, but are you just like the 1 in a million radical, good for you, but nobody else survives this thing and everybody else is going to die and plummet and have a wasted life? Or what happened to you, could it happen to someone else? Yeah. Could another kid find this? I mean, the answer I know is yes, but speak to that from your heart. Yeah.
I would just say get on your knees and pray, because there is a God in heaven who is real, who is reigning. Jesus, it says he's seated above every power and principality, every form of darkness. He is seated above it. He has all authority and all power, and he intercedes for us continually before the throne of God. So your heart's not just breaking for your kid. Jesus' heart is breaking for your kid. Jesus died for your kid. You're not alone in this. I just want to encourage you that he cares and that he can move and that he does miracles and he knows how to reach their heart in the way that we don't know how to reach their heart. But also, don't be afraid to sit and talk with them. Just sit them down and just have that heart to heart and just share that you care about them deeply, and don't pretend like you have everything together, because they see it when you don't. And don't be afraid to admit your own faults, but trust in Jesus. They're looking at what you do. If you are someone who's crying and turning to God and saying, I need you, I need your help, I don't have this figured out, then they're going to see someone who's turning to God and trusting to God, not just someone who's going to church and someone who, that's not moving to go to church. That's just more pressure, and they're already feeling like crap, and they're already feeling worthless, and they're already feeling empty enough. And so I just would encourage you to pray and be there in love, in not just to tell them how much they've messed up because they know it, but to love them into wholeness. Invite God into this process.
Yeah, very good.
That's
Very good.
beautiful. I love that, because I think there's a lot of times when we're struggling with something in life and we kind of want, if you'll just do this, step 1, step 2, step 3, then you can get out of this situation that you're in, or solve this problem that you're in. And you are just narrowing it down to, we have to go to God. We have to trust him. And, I think as parents, being on our knees for every situation that comes up for our children is displaying that trust in him, and not in our own ability to do step 1, step 2, step 3, but to just lay it at his feet and trust him. And I think sometimes in that he gives us insight of how to love and how to enter into these difficult situations with our kids. Yeah. But that's just beautiful. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
I kind of want to turn I don't know if you want to respond to what Jill just said, because I didn't mean to cut in, but it was more of a comment.
Yeah, that's fine.
I love what you're saying, and I think that we really need to admit that we sometimes we oversimplify things. We think, as a parent, it's just stop doing drugs. And as a kid, it's not that easy. Like I don't know how to. I don't know how to build good friendships with healthy people. I don't know how to stop doing this. I don't know how to. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when we tell them what to do, like you're saying, the step, you just got to do this. It seems so unapproachable. Mm-hmm. And already there's a divide between parent and child. Already they feel like they can't come to you. They can't connect with you. Like you don't understand them. And so we don't want to make that worse by oversimplifying their situation. Mm-hmm. But if there are things we've struggled with that God's helped us with, then we can share that, and we can build a bridge. Mm-hmm. That we haven't always been perfect. We're still not perfect, and there's areas where we've messed up too, and we came through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
The area in the past in this, was well-intended, but it got a lot of ridicule back in the 80s in my generation, when the First Lady of the United States of America, Mrs. Reagan, said to all the American youth, just say no. When somebody offers you drugs, just say no, as if that was going to solve the problem. It was well-intended from a woman in her late 60s, early 70s, as though if we just say no to drugs, then we'll be fine. But just as we've asked you to, with heart and empathy and passion, speak to parents and relatives and whatnot, grandparents maybe, of kids that are entering this world, struggling with the world, the flesh, the narcissistic, self-indulgent, do what makes you feel good, be irresponsible, don't go to work, don't go to school, culture that this generation is struggling with, because they have really rejected the institution and the prescription and the path, and they just want to be with their friends. They just want to be in community, and there's something very appealing about that. But if we had a guy that was a junior in high school sitting here at this table, and he looked the part, and he was living the life and doing the things that looked like your life back in your high school days, and he was going to give you, 3 to 5 minutes to give him your best shot on what you could say to him, not the parent, not the grandparent, not the friend, but to the guy who knows what it's like. You've been in his path. What could you say to that young man or young woman who's going, I don't know, you look like one of those guys that, just telling me not to do drugs, but your story can relate to them in a way that
Yeah.
certainly Jill and I can't, but you could. So just speak to a person that's in that way, and then not just in their high school
Yeah.
years, their college years, their post-college years, because
Yeah.
we have a whole generation of addicts who are struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. People are making this look cool. They're talking about it like it's such a cool thing to do. And if you've had it, you know that it's not. It's not lasting. It's not. And I just want you to think about this one fact, that there's not a lot of old addicts, because this lifestyle, even just doing it for fun in moderation, just these things grab hold of your soul. They take more and more and more and more. It says they wage war against your soul. They're damaging your innermost being. Like, that's why sin is called sin, because it hurts us, because it damages us. That's why God doesn't like it. It's because it hurts his children. So it's not just he says it's bad, so it's bad. It's for a reason. And sometimes we don't get that. And for me, when an inanimate object had more control in my life than I did, that made me angry. Like, this little balloon of heroin, this drink, it has more control in my life than I do. I can't function without it. I need this thing. And that's frustrating. But if you look at it, if you look at where addiction leads, it leads to homelessness. If you follow it to its end, if you follow these drugs and the drinking, the hooking up, the partying, it leads to homelessness. It leads to death by overdose. It leads to either rehab or being cured. And those are the 4 end results. That's where it leads.
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
follow it to its end. It's not that glorious. When you look at these homeless people on the street, they've given up the love of their loved ones. They've thrown it away in exchange for that thing. That thing has more control. And I mean, sometimes there's mental illness involved, but often the mental illness is caused by the drug. And often when I talk to these homeless people, I engage with them, and they'll tell me, I want to be homeless. I want to be here because I can drink whenever I want, and I don't have to worry about any bills. So it's when that thing, all it wants is to take more of you. And when you let it, you're losing a part of yourself. You're losing a part of your life. And really what God calls us to do in 2 Timothy, he says, but keep away from youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faithfulness, love, and peace. So he's saying flee from these youthful passions, flee from something that's empty in order to pursue something that's full, something that's real. It says faithfulness. Like, you don't see faithfulness in the drug life. You just see cheating on each other, lying on, like, I had so many of my best friends sleep with my girlfriend, and your whole world falls apart, right? Because your world's based on this girl. And of course, if your world's based on anything, you know, your world's going to fall apart all the time, because God's the only thing stable we can build our lives on. But God is this beautiful, stable foundation, and he's calling us to something that's full, something that's real, something that takes grit. Like, it's hard to be, I mean, it's hard to say no to your flesh, but you're trading this empty thing that just lies to you, and you're trading it for something that's real. And that's what God really showed me was, hey, stop falling for the lie. I have so much more for you. Like, and now I get to help people. Like, I can speak into someone's heart who's contemplating suicide, who's lost hope for life, and I get to make a difference. And it goes from this emptiness to this meaningful, beautiful thing.
Yeah. One way that somebody could look at what you're saying is to say, if I just try harder to be righteous, then that will be the case. But I think what you're saying is relying upon the power of the Holy Spirit to help us to be a different person. And that's where the gospel comes into play too, is that we receive the Holy Spirit when we hand our lives over to him. And there's this understanding of that none of us can do it. None of us has the power to be righteous or to try to be better and to let go of this. But he has that power and can do that in us.
Yeah. Yeah, and in Galatians it says, if you walk according to the Holy Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And I think when I hear that, I think religion, do better, you know? But in real life, the way I've experienced that is Holy Spirit is so fun. Holy Spirit is, I mean, the most delightful being in the universe, and full of life and love and joy, and like he knows and loves that person in front of me, the addict. He loves them more than I love my wife. And he knows what's hurting and what's happening. And he just wants, like, when I follow Holy Spirit, he leads to do the most delightful things. Like, you're just walking, and I can't even believe this. This is like the book of Acts, and I just was like out for coffee, you know? And it's like, it's so fun. And I think if we just listened more, and I don't do that perfectly. I don't, but I want to. That's my prayer is, Holy Spirit, you're so beautiful. You're worth everything of mine. And I still don't give you all of my devotion and all of my attention. And I still go, you know, squirrel, and I still work in my own strength and my own effort. But when I think of how beautiful you are, I want to put myself under your yoke, under your leadership, under your guidance.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we started our podcast today talking a little bit about the generational thing, you know, what's happening to this generation and your generation and Jill and I's generation. And we even dipped back into the 60s and 70s when the drug culture really went crazy in this country. But there's an old, children's story that the Disney company made very famous, and it was called Pinocchio. Pinocchio was all about little boys who got tempted by Pleasure Island. And you can go to Pleasure Island and you can be at an amusement park morning, noon, and night. You can eat anything you want. You can have all the hot dogs you want. You can have all the cotton candy you want. You can just go on rides all day long and all night. And guess what? You don't have to do any chores. And you don't have to obey your mom and dad. And you just can have a great time over at Pleasure Island. And you'd see all these boys going over to Pleasure Island, and Pinocchio and his buddies are like, well, we want to go to Pleasure Island. You know, Pleasure Island would be great. I mean, everybody's going to Pleasure Island, and who doesn't want to go to Pleasure Island, you know? And then they get there, and they have a little bit of fun before the guy behind the curtain pulls out his whip and puts them in a you know the story, I think, you know, where he begins to turn them into donkeys. And that as they turn these little boys into donkeys, then they become part of this work trade. You know, they're just working all the day as little donkeys. And that whole process gets interrupted by the conscience that is little Jiminy Cricket, you know. And he reminds Pinocchio, this is not what you were made for. You've been lied to. Pleasure Island is not what it says it is. It's just a trap to draw you away from good things in your life, like parents who love you, like getting an education, like working hard, like learning good skills. And you're trading that for Pleasure Island, which is fun all day long, and you just do whatever you want to do. And you even said, you know, all my buddies were sleeping with my girlfriend. I bet you slept with somebody else's girlfriend, probably in that same condition, you know. And yet you could feel violated, like, hey, guys, you know, she's my girlfriend. And then flip-flop, you could just be tempted in that moment to do the very same thing to somebody else. And Pleasure Island never guarantees what it promises. Yeah. And there's a guy behind the curtain with his little donkey whip ready to turn you into a slave. Yeah. You're not free anymore to do whatever you want. You're going to become a donkey, and you're going to be turned into the field, and you're going to be working morning, noon, and night, and you've been lied to, and you've been trapped, and you've been caught. I just want to say that there's nothing new under the sun. You know, that the story of Pinocchio wasn't written by Walt Disney, but he made it famous, and it probably is, you know, I don't know exactly when it was written, but 50 to 100 years ago at least, right? People are always drawn to Pleasure Island, but Pleasure Island doesn't exist. It's a big fat lie, and I just love, the fact that you went to Pleasure Island, you hung out there for a while, you almost got turned into a donkey, and then through the goodness of God, he got you off the island and got you back, and little by little, you made the right steps under the right condition of loving parents and godly friends and influences in your life, to where you now have written a book to send over to Pleasure Island and to remind all the little boys and the little girls, don't hang out too long, because you're going to get trapped. And once you get trapped, it's very hard to get off the island. And that is called Pursued, your book. So give us a little bit more specifically about your book, because we want people to buy your book. Is this a book that only parents and friends of addicts should read? Or do you think a young 17-year-old Michael Heil would have read this book if somebody would have given it to him, and would it have made a difference for them?
I think everyone, I'm a little biased. I think everyone should read this book. I mean, I think it's going to touch your heart. I think it's going to, whether you've been there or not, I've had people tell me, man, my uncle or my cousin wrestled with alcoholism and I never understood him, or my child, and now I finally know how to be there for them. So that kind of person. Okay. But also I had a friend who Sonia Levitin, who wrote a book called Journey to America, and it was required reading in our schools for reading on the Holocaust. And she said, when she read my book, she said, every teenager and everyone who deals with teenagers needs to read this book. And for coming from someone whose book was mandatory reading nationwide, like, that's a big compliment.
Yes, it is.
But I really believe that if anyone can relate to it, anyone who's sought Pleasure Island, but anyone who lives in this world, because we have a God who loves us, and so often we fail to see it. But we also have an enemy who wants to destroy us, and so often we trivialize it. We forget how real this war is, how important our souls are, that there is something eternal. There is something that lasts beyond this life, and it is a real promise. And it's not all pleasure. Like Jesus says, in this life there will be tribulation, but do not fear, for I have overcome this world. In this world there will be tribulation. And he's calling us to something that's real. Yeah, real rest, real joy. Jesus says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Peace not as the world gives, but my peace I give to you. So the world gives you this fleeting peace, and the more you have, the more you need. And Jesus says, I'm giving you a peace that's real, and it's lasting. And that word peace means a wholeness of being, a completeness. Wow. And he's calling us to be made whole within ourselves, with our relationships with others, with our relationship with God, with our relationship with creation. He's calling us to be made whole. And that's a promise he gives, but he's just saying, stop falling for the lies. Mm-hmm. And that's a lifelong journey that we can't do on our own. It's just surrender to our King.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Jill.
Oh,
We just went to Disneyland with our two youngest daughters, and we went into Star Wars Land, and I think Callie was the one that said, I feel like I'm on a different planet.
Yeah.
Just the setting of Star Wars Land and all the the props and the construction of literally you don't feel like you're on planet Earth anymore. You feel like, man, I'm really in a Star Wars movie. But that, the I-5 freeway is just north of you, and Catella's over there, and Ball Road. That you're in a theme park, but you could almost give yourself over to believing that. The sense in which the world is a facade, a pretend. It looks good on the outside, but open it up and there's a snake in there. He's going to bite you. Mm-hmm. Parents, and we have our own struggle, and so I'm asking you to be vulnerable, and I decided to ask you before you asked me, so that's how come you're getting asked. But when our kids began to struggle a little bit, and thank God they didn't, stay on Pleasure Island forever and get turned into donkeys, but they were tempted a little bit by Pleasure Island for a season in their lives, and some of that was really kind of scary for us and troubling, because I think one of the key things as parents is that we just want to believe the best in our kids, and other kids struggle with that kind of stuff, and they get in trouble with their phones or their friends or whatever, but we've got a good family, we're going to church, we're doing the right things, we love our kids, we take them on vacation, and yet it sneaks right in. So speak maybe to that parental mindset that can kind of block your discernment and say, my kid could struggle with this stuff just as much as anyone else's, and I got to be there for them, and I got to wrestle for their souls too, because it's not just their kid, it could be my kid. Mm-hmm. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the word humility is standing out to me, and you spoke about relying on the power of the Holy Spirit, and I think to the extent that we feel as parents that we can do X, Y, and Z and have the perfect kids come out is the deception. Yeah. And as we stay in a place of realizing that God has the power, and the more I'm on my knees for my kids and relying upon Him to impact their lives and work in their lives, and staying humble and listening, really, that we can listen to him and respond to him in our kids' lives, and as much as we can to be a representative of Christ and that unconditional love that he gives us, I think can be really powerful in their lives. But I love how you said, just get on your knees. That was the first thing that you said when Greg asked you to talk directly to parents. And I think all of us need to do that, even if we feel like, hey, my kids are doing pretty good. But to just continue to stay on our knees, because a lot of times there's things we're not aware of.
Yeah, nobody is guaranteed a 15-day trial experience on Pleasure Island, you know. Sometimes we think we can just go dabble over there, and then, you know, I'll realize it's not good to stay there all the time, so I'll come back, you know, and then I'll go again, and I'll come back. And the thing is that we have an enemy. We have an adversary. The Bible says, gives him the name Satan or the devil, and that's not made up. That's not fake. That's not an imaginary being. That is a real being, and he has a minion of assistants that go out as his demons to depress and scare and build in fear and loneliness and depression and anxiety and insecurities that make you vulnerable to these very, very serious choices and worldviews that you offer, or that you've talked about today, Mike. And I just think that we have to be, you know, it does feel relieving at age 56 to have one child left in their senior year of high school. It's like, we're almost there. Now, I know that doesn't mean our parenting stops, because there's a whole new world of parenting, but you just want to help them get through. And sometimes they think you're the dumbest person out there, that you're dumber than a pole. And as a parent, you go, I'm not so dumb. You know, I used to be a kid too. And sometimes you feel like you can't even reach them or talk to them, or that they'll even accept your invitation to go to lunch or hang out or love you or whatever. So it's not easy. You have young parents. It feels like it's great, and this is a wonderful thing, and it is. So enjoy those younger years. When 15 or 16 comes around, that's usually a little tougher, a little harder time period, and that's when the world tries to sink its teeth deep into the souls of your 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, and then Pleasure Island can take its toll. So, Mike, any final comments? I know we can get that book on Amazon and various other places. We will definitely put the name of your book on the podcast. And is there a website that you would recommend for people to check this out, or just go to Amazon directly, or any closing thoughts about how to get your book, or things that you want to just share with our audience?
Yeah. I do have a website, and there's more resources on that website.
Okay.
So I've made a companion guide for the book that's free. You can download that on the website, and that's michaeljheil.com. That's just
Heil,
my name.
Spell Heil, because it's not
Heil
H-E-L-L.
is spelled, H-E-I-L. So Michael J. Heil,
It's the opposite of I
H-E-I-L.
after, what is it?
The rule.
Yeah, what is the rule?
I before E, except after C.
Yeah. So this is not a C, this is an H. So you have to go H-E-I-L.
Yeah, .com.
E-I-L.com.
Yeah. And
Mike
it's
Heil. Heal or Hail?
Hail.
Hail, like Hail Theater.
Like the weather phenomenon.
Hail.
Yeah.
Or like Hail.
Yeah.
The hail came
Okay,
down,
we got it.
and we went to Hail Theater.
So this companion guide, so the number one thing that has been proven in all the research studies on addiction, that the number one thing that can help build resilience is a deep, vulnerable relationship between someone sober who's not abusing drugs and someone who is. So just building a relationship where you're vulnerable and transparent, where you're there for each other, that kind of relationship can increase their odds of coming out on the other side up to 80%. So
Wow.
the companion guide it's designed to build that relationship with people. It's going to ask you questions it's going to help you look at, how you might have enabled your child and what kind of boundaries you could set up. But it just goes through each of the chapters of the book, so you can read the book with your kid, and then you can go through the companion guide together, whether you're a counselor and a counselee, or it's two adults, or a husband and wife, or a parent and kid, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's going to deepen their relationship, and it's going to bring up these really hard, vulnerable topics that are terrifying to bring up as an addict, because they make you feel like a loser. But when you just read the story, then I'm the loser, and you just get a bounce off of that. So it brings up this topic with my error, and then maybe if you relate to it, then you can learn from that as well. And I'm working on some video resources.
Okay, great.
There's some charts and graphs, and so it's soon, hopefully within the next month, there'll be videos up that people can buy. There's online consults and things like that are available. They can donate books to kids, to youth, because I go to these different jails or treatment centers, so they can donate books to struggling youth if they want to on my website too.
And you're available to speak to youth groups of any kind. I know that that's something you have a passion to do, and you're quite effective in that way, as I think we've seen today. So if you're looking for a special speaker for your youth group or your school, Mike Heil, HEIL.com. Michael Heil. Jill, any final comment?
Well, I just want to say I love that idea of the companion guide, because I think when you're in a situation like this, it can feel pretty lonely.
Yes.
And so to then be able to say, hey, this guy went through it and he understands what we're going through, I think that's beautiful. So thank you for doing that.
There's so many times when we don't know what to do. It's like it feels hopeless. I've felt that way with my loved ones, my friends. I've tried to help, and I keep reaching out, and I feel like nothing's working. And this at least gives you something to do. Just one thing, one small thing, but it's something.
Yeah, that's great.
And you know what, Mike? If one student, college-age person, parent listens to this and feels compelled to get a copy of your book, and that helps them, then this will be worth the $10,000 we spent on this podcast to make it possible. No, just joking. It'll be worth it to us, to Jill and I, even if it helps one person. But we hope it helps more than one, for sure. And I was just going to say, Jill, the great epidemic of our time, which is another piece of the lie of Pleasure Island, is that you can have your cake and eat it too. But in the midst of a post-pandemic world, isolation and loneliness are some of the two greatest epidemics of our society now. We binge watch, we stay inside, we don't go out, we have our food come to us because we're lonely, we don't feel secure, we don't feel strong, we don't feel confident, and we just feel like nobody cares about us, and so we turn to food, we turn to the things of the flesh, we turn to lots of things. I think that's why I'm passionate about our podcast, because it's called Building Bridges, and Pleasure Island can be whatever it can be, anything. And to get somebody on Pleasure Island to realize this is not a good place for you to be, you got to build a bridge to them. Mm-hmm. You got to build a bridge over the lies and all the beautiful luxury things that they can see that are sparkling all around them, and say, hey, come up to this bridge and let's talk, so that maybe you could realize it's not what it looks like. And then maybe you can come back on our side and come back to a place where you really can find love and community and support. So building bridges is, and obviously I entail that people on the other side of the bridge may want to convince me to go on their side of the bridge. And that's a bridge is a two-way street. But when we're on the bridge, we can talk about it. Is it better to be on Pleasure Island, or is it better not to be on Pleasure Island?
Yeah.
Is this a true thing, or is this a dishonest thing? And we just pray that God, through his grace and mercy, which is rich and abundant to all, we might be able to help people say, it's an illusion, and if you don't get out of here, you're going to end up being a donkey, and you're going to be a slave. Yeah. And that's what the world really gives you. The enemy does not give you the pleasure of Pleasure Island. He gives you the pain of self-destruction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well said?
Very well said. I want to drive that point home. If there's anyone you can think of in your life who's struggling, maybe it is with just loneliness. Maybe it's not addiction. Maybe it's addiction in Netflix. I don't know. or fat takeout food, whatever. Be there for them. Just if there's someone in your life you could build a bridge to, then just reach out. Just tell them you love them unconditionally, whether they give up this thing or not, that you're there and you care. If there's someone you could be there for, just be there for them today. Just call them. Just give them a phone call. Because we always tell ourselves in our mind, oh, they're too busy. That's the enemy. He doesn't want us to build these bridges. He doesn't want us to build connections. Just call. And if they don't answer, leave a message.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then get them my book. You don't have to do the last part. Just call on them and love them.
You know, there's that great classic Stevie Wonder song. You ever heard that song? I just called to say I love you. I just called to say I care. So pick up the phone, call somebody, and tell them you love them. And ask them if they've been to Pleasure Island lately. Because you don't want them to stay there, because Pleasure Island is not a good place to stay.
But don't phrase it like that, because you might weird them out.
That's why you need to do it, because you're so hip and young and cool, and, you know, you relate. You're going to turn 56 one day, too, you know. And you're going to have to sit on this spot and interview the cool, hip guy that has replaced you. I was once upon a time, very long time ago, a hip cool guy.
No one can replace you.
Well, Mike Heil is a great guy. He's seen a lot of hard things in his young life, but God got a hold of him, and he wants to love and serve young people and people that have struggled with some of those same things. And so we build a bridge to you and say, hey, you don't have to stay where you're at. This is not your final destination. You are not done. You have not ruined your life for good. There's always hope when it comes to God. So we want to just remind you of that. Please share this video with others if you think it'd be pertinent to them on social media, Facebook and Instagram and all those kind of things. We would love that. And then come back next month as we have another podcast called Building Bridges with Greg and Jill. See you next time. Thanks.